Olivia adjusted the silver tray in her hands, glancing briefly at the large windows that framed the city skyline beyond the boardroom. Sunlight streamed through the glass, reflecting off polished surfaces and the occasional gold accents in the room, catching Ethan Caldwell mid-thought. He was still studying the report, though now with a less rigid posture, a subtle shift that did not go unnoticed. Olivia moved toward the edge of the table, careful to keep her steps soft on the carpeted floor, yet deliberate enough that her presence was undeniable. She had noticed small discrepancies in the calculations and the way the projected earnings were framed, details that anyone else might have overlooked while focusing on the grand numbers. Leaning slightly over the table, she indicated a particular figure, her voice steady but precise. If we adjust for the projected liabilities in the Southeast Division, the margin improves by 5%, she said, her blue eyes meeting Ethan's gray ones, unflinching. He lifted his head fully this time, a faint flicker of amusement and surprise crossing his features. The executives seated around them exchanged glances, whispering softly, the kind of quiet murmur that carried the weight of revelation. Olivia continued, noting the subtle changes that could prevent contractual conflicts, laying out alternatives with clarity. It is not just the numbers, she added. It is the interpretation that ensures the agreement aligns with both parties' interests. Her tone was neutral, professional, yet it carried the weight of understanding and foresight. Ethan leaned forward, resting his chin on the back of his hand, absorbing every word, the tight lines on his face easing just enough to show that he was considering her input seriously. The air was thick with anticipation, each second stretching as Olivia presented her reasoning methodically. She did not raise her voice, did not gesture extravagantly, yet every person in the room felt the shift in authority. Olivia stepped back slightly, allowing space but maintaining her calm stance, her posture straight, movements measured. Ethan's fingers hovered over the pen, paused mid-air, the penlight catching the metal in a reflective shimmer. He looked at her, then at the report, then back again. There was a moment, fleeting yet profound, where his usual self-assurance met a force that required respect rather than dominance. Olivia did not smile. She simply waited, poised, demonstrating patience and intelligence without a hint of condescension. The room remained silent, the city sounds outside muted by thick glass, the tension inside punctuated only by the rustle of papers and the quiet breaths of those watching. Every subtle adjustment, she suggested, carried the weight of practical wisdom, signaling not only competence, but a deep understanding of the stakes involved. Ethan exhaled slowly, straightening his posture, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a recognition that the presence of this waitress had changed the course of the meeting without fanfare or dramatics. Olivia shifted her weight slightly, eyes scanning the room, noting the attentive gazes, the subtle nods, the acknowledgement of expertise unbound by title. She returned to her initial position near the side, tray balanced, stance calm, a quiet figure whose knowledge had reframed authority in the room. Ethan's eyes lingered on her, not with anger or irritation, but with something closer to curiosity and newfound respect. The other executives resumed their roles, but with a softer edge, their voices measured, aware that a new standard had been silently set. Olivia's calm, deliberate intelligence had imposed its own rhythm on the room, a rhythm that demanded attention without a single raised voice, a quiet reminder that true influence often came from clarity, composure, and insight. Olivia set the tray down carefully on a side table, her eyes scanning the room as she subtly assessed each executive's posture and reactions. Ethan Caldwell leaned slightly forward, hands clasped loosely, yet the rigidity of his shoulders hinted at an internal reckoning. Olivia took a quiet step closer, glancing at the documents once more, and then back at him, her expression neutral yet compelling. "There is one more clause that could be interpreted ambiguously," she said softly, pointing to the highlighted section with the tip of her finger. The room was silent, everyone holding their collective breath. Ethan's gray eyes flicked to her, a mixture of surprise and curiosity. He did not interrupt, though a flicker of tension crossed his usually composed features. Olivia continued, explaining the potential pitfalls in a manner both clear and meticulous, her voice steady, conveying authority without demanding it. She described the implications, outlined alternatives, and demonstrated her reasoning in such a way that every person present understood the weight of her insight. The assistant who had initially prepared the reports shifted slightly, realizing that her knowledge and attention to detail exceeded expectations, her competence eclipsing the assumption that her role was merely menial. Ethan moved his gaze from the page to Olivia, focusing on the precision in her words, the confidence in her stance, and the calm assurance in her tone. "You have an unusual eye for detail," he said quietly, not as a rebuke, but as acknowledgement. Olivia tilted her head slightly, offering a small, enigmatic smile. "Attention and careful observation go hand in hand," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had unsettled yet captivated the room. The other executives began to nod subtly, their previous murmurs giving way to a new sense of respect, the energy in the room shifting from deference to recognition of her intellect. Ethan placed the pen down finally, letting a moment of silence linger between them, absorbing the significance of the intervention without needing to assert his dominance. Olivia stepped back just slightly, maintaining her poised stance, her presence commanding respect through composure rather than volume. The sunlight shifted, casting a warm glow over the polished surfaces and highlighting the faint line of determination on her face. Ethan's usual calculated, controlled demeanor softened, replaced by an unspoken acknowledgement that intelligence and foresight could come from unexpected places. Olivia continued to observe, noting the subtle shifts in body language, the change in tone among the executives, the quiet respect now extended toward her without a word spoken. Each carefully chosen suggestion she made carried weight, not through force but through clarity and insight, shaping the course of the meeting imperceptibly yet irrevocably. Ethan's gaze lingered, a thoughtful expression forming as he realized that some influence was exercised most powerfully through knowledge, calm, and precision. The room remained suspended in this delicate balance, a tableau of quiet authority and unspoken acknowledgement, where Olivia Carter, without raising her voice or making any grand gesture, had subtly redefined the hierarchy of attention and respect. Every movement, every word, every glance was measured and deliberate, creating a rhythm that demanded recognition and proved that competence and composure were sometimes more impactful than position or title alone. The hum of the air conditioning and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall filled the brief pauses between words as Olivia Carter continued to guide the room with quiet precision. Ethan Caldwell's attention had shifted fully, his earlier skepticism replaced by careful consideration, a subtle tension easing from his shoulders as he processed her observations. Olivia moved toward the window for a brief moment, letting the light catch the edge of her uniform, then turned back, eyes scanning the spread of contracts, each page a potential trap if not interpreted correctly. Her voice remained soft yet unmistakable in authority as she pointed out a minor discrepancy in the revenue projections that could have gone unnoticed by any other attendee. If this section is adjusted to reflect the correct timelines, it aligns better with projected cash flows, she said, emphasizing the implications without over-explaining, allowing Ethan and the others to follow her reasoning naturally. The room remained still, every chair creaking softly as executives leaned forward, absorbing each word, each pause, and each intentional glance. Ethan's hand hovered above the contract, poised to sign, yet he lingered, compelled to fully understand the subtle corrections she offered. Olivia did not hesitate, did not waver. Her movements were deliberate and graceful as she navigated the space between the table and the sideboard, gesturing slightly to indicate patterns in the financial charts while maintaining eye contact with the CEO. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, as comprehension settled in, the weight of her insight becoming evident. The assistant beside him scribbled notes hurriedly, realizing that the clarity of Olivia's explanation would prevent future misinterpretation and mitigate risk that no one had foreseen. Olivia took a measured breath, glancing around the room, noting the subtle changes in demeanor, the softened posture of senior executives who were now listening with renewed attentiveness. Ethan leaned back, resting one hand on the polished surface of the table, eyes following her as she summarized the key points with brevity and clarity, each statement a demonstration of understanding and judgment that required no additional validation. There was no overt triumph, no self-congratulation, only the calm, meticulous presentation of facts, the quiet force of competence that had silently transformed the energy of the room. The sunlight shifted again, catching the metallic pens and the edges of documents, highlighting the fine details of her steady hands and composed stance. Olivia returned to the side of the room, slightly lowering her gaze but remaining alert, the room's dynamic subtly but irrevocably altered by her presence. Ethan Caldwell's expression was thoughtful, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them, unspoken yet profound, as he absorbed that some of the most powerful influence did not come from title or wealth, but from clear perception, careful reasoning, and the understated confidence of someone who demanded to be seen for their intellect alone. The executives began to murmur, reassessing previous assumptions, realizing the meeting's outcome had been guided not by position or authority, but by the silent mastery and insight of the young waitress who had held the room with poise and intellect. Olivia shifted her weight slightly, keeping her movements deliberate as she approached the sideboard to retrieve a fresh set of documents, her eyes still scanning the room for subtle reactions. Ethan Caldwell's gaze followed her, not with impatience, but with a quiet intensity, as if trying to anticipate the next insight she would offer. The sunlight, now softer as the afternoon progressed, reflected off the glass walls and cast elongated shadows across the table, adding a warmth that contrasted with the polished, cool surfaces of the boardroom. Olivia's voice remained calm, her words precise, as she explained an overlooked detail in the scheduling of deliverables, the kind of nuance that could prevent downstream issues yet often went unnoticed. Adjusting the timeline here ensures compliance with both internal auditing and client expectations, she said, her tone steady, confident, yet never domineering. Ethan leaned back, his hands resting lightly on the table, fingers steepled as he absorbed each statement, his expression gradually shifting from surprise to focused engagement. The other executives, initially quiet, began to nod subtly, their pens scratching notes as they followed her reasoning, the room alive with the quiet energy of realization. Olivia moved back toward the center of the room, gesturing with one hand to emphasize the alignment of projected revenues and the importance of clear communication between departments, her posture composed and authoritative without any need for volume. Ethan's gray eyes flicked between her and the figures on the paper, the careful cadence of her explanations guiding him through the potential implications and benefits. A faint smile crossed his face, almost imperceptible, as he recognized that her intervention had not only clarified the issues, but also elevated the discussion, drawing attention to details that would otherwise have been dismissed. Olivia adjusted her stance slightly, the soft swish of her shoes on the carpet the only sound as she prepared to summarize her observations. This approach not only mitigates risk, but also positions the company strategically for the next quarter, she added, letting the weight of her words settle. In the room, Ethan nodded, exhaling slowly, a subtle acknowledgement of respect passing between them, the kind of recognition that did not need to be spoken aloud. The executives began to exchange glances, their murmurs quiet but filled with appreciation, an unspoken agreement forming that Olivia's insight had shifted the tone of the meeting and subtly redefined who held authority in that space, if only through intellect and composure. Olivia returned to her initial position near the window, standing poised, her gaze steady yet soft, absorbing the acknowledgement that came from the room without seeking it, understanding fully the silent influence she had exerted. Ethan, still seated, considered the implications, aware that her presence and intervention had changed the dynamic entirely, teaching a lesson in observation, clarity, and understated power that the boardroom would not soon forget. Every movement, every word, every carefully measured pause had combined to demonstrate that influence could be exerted without title, that wisdom and calm decisiveness were more compelling than any overt display of authority, and that sometimes the quietest presence in the room commanded the greatest respect. Olivia stepped lightly across the polished floor, her eyes scanning the expressions of each executive in the room, noting the subtle shifts in posture and the small gestures that betrayed admiration hidden beneath their professional facades. Ethan Caldwell's gaze remained fixed on her, gray eyes narrowing ever so slightly, not with suspicion, but with the curiosity that comes when someone is quietly proving their value in ways that cannot be ignored. The afternoon sun had lowered, casting a warm glow through the tall windows, reflecting off the glass surfaces of awards and pens scattered across the long conference table. Olivia's voice was calm, unwavering, as she highlighted a scheduling conflict in the upcoming quarter, outlining a solution that was efficient, practical, and elegant in its simplicity. Realigning the timelines here ensures that deliverables will coincide with client expectations, avoiding any unnecessary delays, she said softly, gesturing to the relevant figures on the spreadsheet. Ethan's hands hovered above the documents, momentarily frozen, processing the clarity and depth of her insight. He leaned forward, studying her not just as a participant in the meeting, but as someone whose understanding and foresight had altered the room's energy. The other executives shifted in their seats, acknowledging the precision in her reasoning, the quiet authority in her tone, the way she communicated. Without raising her voice, yet demanded their full attention. Olivia continued to guide the discussion, subtly emphasizing risks and benefits, her body language composed, movements precise, and her eyes reflecting a calm confidence that radiated through the room. Ethan's jaw loosened slightly as a small smile appeared, the kind that acknowledged capability without needing to verbalize approval. He tapped the pen gently against the table, listening, absorbing, letting the realization settle that her input had transformed the direction of the meeting. Olivia did not pause unnecessarily, but allowed moments for comprehension, letting the weight of her observations resonate naturally. The sunlight shifted again, brushing over her hands as she organized documents, highlighting her deliberate, controlled movements. Each note she made, each observation shared, reinforced the influence she held not through title or position, but through knowledge, composure, and an unspoken demand for attention and respect. Ethan's posture softened, his usual meticulous control tempered by the awareness that intelligence and perceptiveness could come from unexpected places. The room seemed to breathe with this new rhythm, a quiet acknowledgement of Olivia's subtle authority. The executives adjusted, murmuring quietly among themselves, their respect evident in the way they referenced her points, a recognition that decisions had been improved and the meeting's outcome shaped by her presence. Olivia returned to her previous position near the window, standing with poise, her expression neutral, yet her effect on the atmosphere undeniable. Ethan watched for a moment longer, silent, the flicker of admiration in his eyes, before he leaned back and allowed the room to continue, aware that the young waitress had not only contributed vital insight, but had shifted the perception of power and influence, quietly teaching the room that clarity, intelligence, and composure could command as much respect as any title. Olivia allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, the subtle shift of weight from one foot to the other unnoticed by most, yet fully intentional, a pause to mark the quiet culmination of her careful guidance. Ethan Caldwell's gaze lingered on her, gray eyes reflecting a mix of calculation and newfound respect, a trace of a smile forming as he finally recognized the depth of her contribution. The sunlight, now waning, painted golden highlights along the edges of the conference table, illuminating the fine lines of the documents Olivia had guided them through with such precision. She spoke once more, softly, emphasizing the final adjustments that would secure both compliance and strategic advantage. Her words concise yet weighted with clarity. Ensuring this alignment now prevents future misinterpretation and allows the team to focus on execution rather than correction, she stated, her voice steady, carrying authority without overt assertion. Ethan exhaled, a subtle nod accompanying the realization that her intervention had improved the outcome more than any preliminary review could have achieved alone. The executives shifted in their seats, pens pausing over notepads, exchanging quick glances that conveyed quiet admiration for the composure and insight Olivia displayed. She remained poised, standing slightly apart yet central to the room's focus, demonstrating that influence and respect were not always dictated by position, but often by perception, intelligence, and calm decisiveness. Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced, observing her with measured contemplation, the earlier skepticism now replaced by acknowledgement that her presence had fundamentally altered the meeting's dynamic. Each subtle gesture, each carefully chosen word, each deliberate glance had combined to create a rhythm of authority and insight that guided the room without a raised voice, without fanfare, commanding attention through competence alone. Olivia's attention remained on the documents briefly, ensuring that all points were addressed and that every implication had been considered. The precision of her observations mirrored in the meticulous notes of the executives who had initially underestimated her role. The room, once filled with a quiet tension, now hummed with a new energy, a recognition that guidance could emerge from unexpected sources and that those who listened attentively could benefit immeasurably from insights delivered with clarity and composure. Ethan's gaze met hers again, longer this time, the flicker of admiration and acknowledgement unspoken but profound as he recognized that intelligence and decisiveness, even when presented quietly, had the power to shift perception and command respect. Olivia finally stepped back, hands relaxed at her sides, posture still impeccable, letting the room absorb the finality of her contributions. The sunlight dimmed further, casting a warm, steady glow over her calm presence, highlighting the lesson that had unfolded without announcement or ostentation. True influence is often measured not by volume or status, but by clarity, foresight, and the quiet confidence of one who knows their worth and is unafraid to let it be seen. Olivia felt the subtle shift in the room as executives leaned slightly forward, their attention fully captured by the clarity and precision of her observations. Ethan Caldwell remained seated, his gray eyes fixed on her with a mixture of contemplation and admiration, silently acknowledging the depth of her insight without interrupting her measured explanation. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast a warm glow over the polished surfaces, highlighting the careful lines of the documents and the steady movements of Olivia's hands as she organized her notes. She continued to outline the final considerations for the project, her voice calm and deliberate, ensuring that each recommendation was understood, each implication noted, and every possible outcome anticipated. Implementing these adjustments will not only prevent delays but also enhance operational efficiency across the board, she said softly, emphasizing the practical benefits while maintaining an unassuming tone. Ethan shifted slightly in his chair, absorbing her words, the subtle nods of the other executives reflecting a growing recognition of her contribution. Olivia moved back to the center of the room, her posture poised, each step measured and confident, yet unobtrusive, a quiet assertion of authority through competence alone. The room, once tense with expectation, now held a steady, focused energy, guided by her careful explanations and unwavering composure. Ethan's fingers tapped lightly on the polished surface of the table, his thoughts turning over the implications of her suggestions, the effectiveness of her communication, and the unexpected thoroughness with which she had addressed complex issues. Olivia's blue eyes met his for a brief moment, conveying assurance without arrogance, a silent understanding that her intervention had been both necessary and precise. The executives followed her lead, their pens pausing and then scribbling notes, their murmurs soft but approving, a subtle acknowledgement that her intellect and foresight had reshaped the conversation. Olivia returned to her position near the window, standing with a natural elegance, her gaze moving across the room as she allowed the final points to settle, each individual processing the depth and significance of the input she had provided. Ethan exhaled, a slow, deliberate motion, recognizing that her presence had shifted not only the immediate decisions, but the perception of influence and authority in the room. The sunlight softened further, casting gentle reflections across the polished floors, illuminating the quiet confidence in her stance, the careful deliberation in her movements, and the calm intelligence that had subtly guided the outcome. The meeting had progressed from routine review to an exercise in precision, insight, and respect, and it was Olivia's composed clarity, her meticulous attention to detail, and her unspoken command of the room that had led the transformation. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, thoughtful, measuring, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, knowing that this quiet display of competence had conveyed more influence than any title, any position, and that her calm, intelligent authority had earned a respect that words alone could not express. The meeting slowly came to a close, the rustle of papers and the soft click of pens marking the final moments as Olivia Carter remained standing, calm, composed, her presence still commanding without a word raised in volume. Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair, the tension that had held his shoulders rigid for the past hour now eased, replaced by a quiet contemplation and a trace of admiration that did not require verbal acknowledgement. He studied her carefully, noticing the meticulous alignment of her notes, the unassuming confidence in her posture, and the subtle way her eyes had guided the room to focus on precision and clarity. Olivia allowed a small, controlled exhale, maintaining her poise as she ensured that every document, every figure, and every detail had been addressed, leaving nothing to chance and no room for misinterpretation. The afternoon sun dipped lower, sending a warm glow across the polished surfaces, highlighting the measured grace of her movements as she returned the documents to their designated folders, each placement intentional and exact. The executives, now relaxed yet attentive, murmured softly amongst themselves, their voices tinged with a newfound respect, their pens slowing as they reflected on the guidance Olivia had provided. Ethan's gaze lingered, thoughtful, as he absorbed the lesson that had unfolded before him. Authority was not only conveyed through title, wealth, or position, but often through the quiet precision of insight, the careful orchestration of clarity, and the confident delivery of intelligence that demanded recognition without seeking it. Olivia shifted slightly, acknowledging the subtle change in energy around her, a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that her presence had subtly yet unmistakably influenced the outcome of the meeting. The room held a stillness, a soft hum of reflection and acknowledgement, as the executives began to gather their things, now operating with a heightened awareness of the value brought by observation, preparation, and quiet determination. Ethan finally leaned forward, placing a hand lightly on the edge of the table, a silent gesture of respect and recognition, as his eyes met hers with the unspoken understanding that the impact she had made would not be forgotten. The light in the room softened further, casting long, calm shadows across the floor, emphasizing the composure with which Olivia had navigated the complex discussion. She returned to a position near the window, poised and steady, her gaze sweeping the room to ensure the final impressions were clear, her calm intelligence having quietly reshaped the perception of influence and authority. Ethan exhaled slowly, a subtle shift in his posture, and offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the profound effect of her measured guidance, the skillful interweaving of clarity, foresight, and understated command that had transformed the atmosphere and outcome of the meeting. Every step she had taken, every word she had chosen, every pause and glance had contributed to a subtle yet undeniable shift in power, demonstrating that sometimes the strongest influence comes not from force or volume, but from composed intelligence, clarity of vision, and the courage to stand confidently without needing recognition, leaving an indelible impression that would resonate long after the meeting had ended.